Hello, I'm Addons and this is my Restoration Shaman guide for patch 6.2. Let me start things off with saying that Resto Shamans are on top of the jungle when it comes to pure throughput healing. Even though the current healing meta isn't focused on smart heals or on healing stacked groups of players, which are the two things Shamans were great at in MoP and earlier. But there is one simple reason why they are the best. They weren't hit hard with the ability pruning and as a result have a large pool of spells to choose from, to the extent of having something to cast every single global cooldown of a raid encounter. What also helps is the multiple strong and long cooldown AoE healing abilities. The only, and I do mean the only downside to this spec is its complete lack of choice in the talent tree and glyphs. So let's start the guide off from there. At level 15, Astral Shift is generally a better spell than the other two because it is an on-use 40% damage reduction cooldown that can help you soak anything in raids that is meant to be soaked and can save your life in many situations. Nature's Guardian is a good choice though if you don't know a certain fight very well and don't know when to use Astral Shift. It procs automatically when your health drops below 30%, giving you a 25% boost to your maximum HP. So you have to pick one of these depending on your personal experience with each boss in a raid. The next tier is a utility tier. Frozen Power doesn't compete with the other two talents, Earth Grab and Windwalk. Those two have occasional uses in Hellfire Citadel. Just to name a few, Earth Grab Totem can be really helpful when fighting Killrog, Gorefiend and Socratar to root and slow all of the different adds in those fights, and Windwalk has even more uses. On Hellfire Assault for a debuff called Cover, on Iron River to get through the oil on the ground if you really need to, same for Fellfire on Socratar and for the Empowered Gaze or should I say the Frost Circles on the ground when fighting Manoroth. So the quote-unquote choice depends on which boss you are fighting. Now the level 45 tier is a tricky one. Call of the Elements increases your healing done by allowing you to cast 2 consecutive healing stream totems. Totemic Presence by allowing you to use Healing Stream in combination with Healing Tide at the same time increases your burst healing by a bit. But these are minor healing increases and you have to switch these talents out depending on what boss you are fighting, like in the previous tiers. I personally prefer Call of the Elements for most bosses, but another thing to note here is that the third option is the most commonly used one, even though it is only useful for CC. Now, it's called Totemic Projection, and it basically moves all your totems to a location that you already placed, to a location on the ground you target. This is only good to use with Capacitor Totem. It has no effect on the others. So you use it to move the capacitor to a location of some adds and stun them all for 5 seconds, without you having to go there. If you aren't doing top tier content like mythic raids, this tier is really not that important, so pick whatever you want. However, if you are, or if you just want to do your best in any kind of content you are doing, you should examine every fight for details and choose one of these 3 talents, however small the benefit. And while I'm here, I might as well mention a few places you can use Capacitor Totem to help the raid out. Even though it can be used on most ad fights, the ones you should focus on are Gorefiend when you are in his belly, Xul Horak for the imps, as well as Manoroth for his imps, and most importantly on Archimond Phase 2. Now back to the talents. In the next tier, the default talent is Echo of Elements and you should never switch it out. You gain 2 charges of the spells you most need to heal. In the level 75 tier, the story is the same. Always use Healing Streams. It's a passive buff to healing. Again in the next tier, Elemental Blast is the only viable talent, and it gives you the spell Elemental Blast, which is used to gain a Mastery, Crit, Haste or Multi-Strike buff every 12 seconds for 8 seconds, plus a good chunk of Spirit as well. So it's a form of active mana regeneration, which other healers don't have anymore except for the monks. You should cast this spell whenever you can, and you will never go out of mana, though it doesn't have priority over other heals. And as for the buff from the spell, you shouldn't really read too much into it, and treat it as a passive buff. It's really hard and ultimately pointless to rely on it, since it's RNG as hell. Now, as the former 3 tiers, the level 103 only has one viable talent again, and it's High Tide. Its buffs are Chain Heal, making it our strongest heal. It also forces us to use Riptide often, since Chain Heal now bounces to 2 additional targets that have Riptide. So that's it for the talents. As I said before, not much choice, and the only ones you do have are utility ones. Now moving on to glyphs, Glyph of Healing Stream and Glyph of Healing Wave are the 2 glyphs you never switch out. For the 3rd spot there are a lot of contenders. Spirit Walker's Grace and Spirit Walker's Focus are 2 glyphs that are a contrast and really depend on what kind of a player you are. Glyph of Cleansing Waters and Purify Spirit alter your dispel, and are generally used in specific fights that require you to dispel a lot. However, there aren't many of those in Hellfire Citadel. But the glyph I have as a default 3rd glyph is actually a PvP one called Glyph of Ghost Wolf, and it allows you to move faster even when slowed, but you must be in wolf form. It comes in handy when you most need it, especially if you don't use Windwalk Totem. But when a fight requires another glyph, like the Dispel or the Spirit Walker ones, you should really switch to them. Now let's talk about the core Resto Shaman gameplay. The spell you will use the most as a Resto Shaman is Riptide, and it will always be on the top 3 HPS spells you have. But it also has a lot of synergy with other spells, so that's why you spam it. It interacts with Chain Heal, as I have stated before, because of the talent High Tide, as well as the passive Tidal Waves. The passive procs from Chain Heal and Riptide and gives you 2 charges that you can use to have a faster cast on Healing Wave or a higher crit chance on your next Healing Surge. This means that you should never cast one of those 2 spells, so Surge or Wave, without having the charges of Tidal Waves, and it gives you something to do always. Chain Heal is your bread and butter AoE heal, or should I say cleave heal. It is the only, and I do mean the only, not on a large cooldown that you can use to heal more than one player. And if you use it correctly, you will do a lot of healing with it. Now, another spell that helps you here is, and that affects the rest of your heals, is Unleash Life. It instantly gives you a 30% buff to your next single target heal, and since Chain Heal is cast on a single target, even though it jumps, you can spend the buff on it. And you almost exclusively should use it on Chain Heal. Sometimes it's better to spend it on Healing Surge to heal someone to full HP when he's at almost 0, or on Riptide mainly on the tanks or on people with strong debuffs, but primarily on Chain Heal. So these are the 5 spells that have synergy, and how you use them will define how good of a Resto Shaman you really are. So Riptide has a small cooldown and 2 charges and really low mana cost, so you should use it as much as possible. Every time you see someone get damaged, cast a Riptide fast. Then follow it up with a Healing Wave or Surge depending on the amount of damage the target received. In most fights, you will have time to buff your Chain Heal with Unleash Life, and you should always pre-plan the spell in order to quickly get the Chain Heal out on the raid. This is important because Chain Heal is a relatively long cast, and as I said, other than that, you can't reliably heal multiple people at the same time without using a big cooldown. Now, every time you have tidal waves, even though it might seem unnecessary to use healing wave, you should do it. It doesn't cost much mana and it can heal for a lot if it crits. Now, it is a little hard to explain all of this and it depends a lot on things that are going on in the fight. But the best I can do is to recommend to everyone that wants to make it as a resto shaman to practice just these 5 spells and ignore the rest for at least a couple of hours. And then when you got these 5 spells down, and trust me, I know it's 5 spells, but there's a lot of ways you can use them. Then you can move on to the rest, which are really easy to manage. For instance, Healing Stream should be used on cooldown as always, same as Healing Rain, so little thinking there involved. Healing Tide is your oh shit, the raid is about to die spell, and it is far more easier to use than its counterparts from other classes like Tranquility and Hymn of Hope. And it's Fire and Forget. Although when there is a fight where you take constant high AoE damage over a short period of time, a well-placed Tide is always better than a premature one. Then of course we have Earth Shield, which you have to keep active on one of the tanks that is tanking the boss, but if you have classes like the Paladins and Priests in your raid, that's not that important really, but you should still do it. So at this point, other classes wouldn't have any more really important spells, but Shamans do. They have Ascendance for amazing burst AoE healing when used with Chain Heal or basically any other spell. We have Spirit Link Totem to equalize everyone's health in the radius and prevent a lot of deaths. And while everyone has equal health, we and the rest of the healers can top them off easily. We have Elemental Blast that we pretty much cast on cooldown to increase our healing done. In terms of DPS, we have the most short-term burst out of any healer, and that is extremely more useful on a lot of fights than constant low DPS other healers can do. But we can do that as well with Chain Lightning, Lightning Bolt and Searing Totem. But if you want to burst something down, you can summon your Fire Rally and follow it up with a Flame Shock, then cast 2 Lava Bursts and you did like tons of damage in 5 seconds. You can even use Elemental Blast before all of that for extra DPS if you want. Then we have a lot of utility spells and totems. Bloodlust of course, Hex for CC, Capacitor Totem which I mentioned earlier, Grounding Totem, which can be used on some single target boss and add abilities to completely nullify them or even throw it back at them with the right glyph. Purge, one of the 3 classes that actually have it, and all those totems from our talent tree. Earth Grab, Wind Walk and even Frost Shock as an extra slow. So all in all, Shamans have the most abilities that they use regularly in a fight to heal and increase their healing, plus the utility spells and totems. And no matter how small those benefits are, they are appreciated in a good raid and a good guild. Now I will quickly cover how to heal in a mythic and challenge mode dungeons. And really most things don't change, at least not as much as with the other classes. The priority shifts to preventing damage instead of healing it. So all of your utility totems are far more important to be used correctly. Capacitor to stun large groups of mobs, Grounding to prevent high damage spells, Earth Grab to kite, Earth Elemental to pull some aggro so that your tank doesn't die, Hex for additional CC, and of course Purge, without which most challenge modes cannot even be completed. And you can also switch out a few talents. Nature's Guardian can be better than Astral Shift for the sole purpose of surviving an unpredictable or unavoidable damage, and there are a lot of those moments in challenge modes than there are in raids. Though you might even experiment with the Bulwark totem because it can be better if you don't forget to use it because of its constant absorption shield. Then, since you don't have a strong instant cast spell, Ancestral Swiftness is a good choice. It, however, will force you to use Glyph of Riptide. So if you are using Ancestral Swiftness, please use the Glyph of Riptide, otherwise don't take the talent. Now, if it weren't for the 1k spirit buff on Elemental Blast, I would recommend using Unleashed Fury for extra single target healing, but Elemental Blast also does damage, and the spirit allows you to spam whatever spell you want whenever you want it, and spares you the time you would be spending on drinking. And because we have good DPS and don't exactly need High Tide outside of raids, Storm Elemental Totem, while not such a good talent by itself, the other two are even worse. It will allow you to DPS a bit while it heals the tank in boss fights, and in challenge modes good healers are DPS as well. The last thing to note is how to deal when the group is spread out so that you can't use your chain heal. Keep Riptide on DPS that have taken some damage and are around 80% of their HP. It will heal them up along with Healing Stream Totem without you having to cast anything else on them. And use the stacks of Tidal Wave to Healing Surge the tank or really low DPS. Or if the tank is above 80%, use Healing Wave. Now the rest is the same as in raids. Moving on to gearing. The stat priority is Mastery, then Haste, then Multi-Strike and Crit, and finally Versatility. Now Spirit is only important if you aren't using Elemental Blast. The talent allows you to ignore Spirit completely, so you should be using it. Then you will have more of the other stats you need. As for the trinkets, they are all good in certain situations except for the Archimond one. It contradicts your 4-set bonus as well as the mandatory final talent High Tide. It gives you benefits for healing targets with Riptide, while High Tide and the 4-set give you benefits for healing targets without it. So I would recommend that you only use the trinket if you are trying out a new and untested build that doesn't include the 4-set and High Tide. Now the trinket from Kilrogg is only good for burst healing. If you don't need burst healing, the two best options are the trinkets from Sokretar and Hellfire Assault. The one from Xul Horak is extremely situational. Oh, and when you do get the 4-set bonus, your gameplay changes a bit in that you should avoid the healing targets that have Riptide on them if you can, but not to the extent of healing a full HP player to apply the hot over an injured player that hasn't. The add-ons I use are the same as for the rest of my characters. Move Anything for the UI, Quartz for the casting bar, Tidy Plates for unit frames, and Weak Auras, which I have gone a bit crazy with on this character. I made the trackers for Tidal Waves charges, Healing Stream Totem and Healing Rain, and even Elemental Blast. Out of all of those, I would say that the only important ones are the Tidal Wave stacks. As for macros, I don't use any, because for the longest time shamans were unable to make macros for totems, and to be honest there isn't much need for them anymore. Only for race specific ones like Blood Fury to match up with Ascendants, with the trinket from Kilrogg or a PvP trinket if you are using it. So that's everything I have to share about the rest of Shami. Hope you found this guide useful. If you have any questions, write them in the comments and I will answer every single one. Thanks for watching and see you next time.